The Rapid City, South Dakota, CIVYC Center buzzed with a crisp, restless hum that chilly April evening in 2025, the air tinged with the scent of pine and wet earth drifting through the open windows. Rows of folding chairs creaked under a crowd of Great Plains locals, ranchers in weathered hats, their hands rough from branding, retirees clutching coffee mugs, the steam curling faintly, families juggling coats, and restless kids, the rustle of denim blending with the low drone of overhead heaters. They'd gathered under the flicker of industrial lights to hear Kristi Noem, the steely governor, whose tailored jacket and sharp prairie drawl turned the modest hall into a stage of taut anticipation. The space, usually a venue for cattle auctions and school dances, pulsed with a different weight tonight, as if the scuffed concrete floor braced itself for a reckoning. Her voice rolled over the murmurs: freedom, agriculture, South Dakota strong, her hands gesturing with the confidence of a rancher mid-roundup. The crowd clapped unevenly, some cheering with gruff loyalty, others shifting with quiet doubt, the energy more tempered than the roaring rallies of her early tenure. Outside, the wind howled across the Black Hills, a low wail rattling the panes, but inside, in the third row, a small figure sat coiled, a spark of indignation glowing beneath a cascade of red pigtails, her presence a soft tremor against the room's steady churn. 7-year-old Nora perched on her chair's edge, her pigtails swaying as she clutched a faded green backpack to her chest, her sneakers scuffing the floor in a faint, restless rhythm. Her checkered shirt red and white, a hand-me-down from her brother, stood out like a banner against the muted sea of khaki and wool around her. Beside her, her moth-arrow wiry woman with windburned cheeks and a patched coat kept her gaze on Noem, her calloused hands twisting a program into knots, her lips pressed tight with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Inside Nora's backpack wasn't a toy or a snack, but a crumpled journal, its pages a battlefield of purple crayon questions she'd scratched out under the dim glow of a barn lamp. Born from a loss she couldn't forgive. "You don't have to say it, Nora," her mom had whispered as they'd left their ranch that evening, the gate creaking shut, her voice rough with worry. "She's the governor." But Nora's gray eyes had flared, her grip tightening on the straps until her knuckles whitened. "I need her to know," she'd said, that her mother had seen a fury in her she couldn't tame, a fury stoked by a grave she'd dug herself. 3 weeks ago, Nora's world had cracked. Her pet goat, Daisy, a scruffy kid with a bell that jingled across their pasture, had vanished after a storm, swept away when the creek flooded from runoff, a mess her mom blamed on loosened grazing rules. Nora had found Daisy days later, tangled in debris downstream, her bell silent, her small body cold. She'd buried her under a cottonwood, sobbing as she shoveled dirt, wondering why the grown-ups who ran things didn't keep the land safe. She'd grown up on her mom's stories, tales of stewardship, of caring for the plains, but Daisy's grave, the way her mom's voice broke over "it's getting worse," didn't match. She'd started scribbling in that journal doodles of goats, wavy water lines, then questions, short and fierce, until they shaped the one she carried now, a weight she needed to hurl. Noem powered through her speech with the grit of a cattle drive: property rights, deregulation, feeding the nation, her dark hair gleaming as she grinned, drawing murmurs of "that's right," and scattered applause. She spoke of cutting red tape, of protecting our herds, her voice a steady rhythm of resolve as she painted a picture of a thriving prairie. Nora watched, her stillness uncanny for a kid her age, her fingers tracing her backpack's frayed zipper, her eyes tracking Noem's every move, the way her hands sliced the air, the way her grin stayed fixed, a wall she couldn't trust. The crowd stirred, some leaning forward with pride, others slumping back with a weariness born of drought and debt. A rancher in the back adjusted his hat, muttering about beef prices. A retiree beside him clutched her mug, her sigh thick with years. But Nora sat like a hawk, her breath shallow, her heart pounding as she waited for her chance. The moderatora, stocky man with a clipboard and a nervous tick, called for questions, and the room surged to life. Hands rosy, a farmer grumbling about water rights, his voice rough with dust, a teacher asking about schools, her tone sharp, a retiree fussing over health care, his glasses slipping as he spoke. Noem fielded each with a bold, practiced e-stats about crop yields, jabs at DC. Elites, a nod to rural grit. The crowd clapped politely, some cheering, others exchanging glances that hinted at doubts unvoiced. The answers loud, but not deep, like a wind without rain. Nora's mother glanced at her, worry etching her brow. "You sure, Nora?" she whispered, her program now a shredded mess. But Nora shook her head, her pigtails bouncing, and slid off her chair with a soft scrape that cut through the hum. She shuffled forward, her sneakers scuffing the concrete, her steps steady as she wove through the tangle of legs and coats to the microphone stand. The crowd didn't notice at first, their focus still on Noem's latest quip, something about green agendas, but then heads swiveled, eyes narrowing as this tiny figure emerged. Whispers buzz, "Who's that kid? What's she got there?" "She's little." Their voices a low rumble that grew as she reached the front. She stood there, dwarfed by the mic, her green backpack a shield against the swell of stairs. The moderator faltered, his clipboard trembling, his mouth opening to redirect, but Nora raised a small hand, claiming her turn with a quiet ferocity that silenced the room. The chatter stopped, a stark silence settling like snow on the plains, every creak and cough swallowed by the hush. Noem paused, her head tilting, her sharp gaze softening with a flicker of amusement as she leaned on the podium. "Well, howdy, little one," she said, her drawl warm and easy, a grin tugging at her lips. "What's on your mind?" Nora unzipped her backpack, pulled out her journal, flipped to a page marked with a goat, and took a shaky breath. "Governor Noem," she began, her voice small but a blade, "you say you're helping ranchers, so why'd my goat Daisy die in a flood you didn't stop?" The words struck like a thunderclap, raw and unyielding, splitting the calm with a grief too plain to dodge. Noem's grin froze, her eyes widening, her hands tightening on the podium as the entire room went silent as sharp, collective stillness that sucked the air dry. Her face, a bastion of toughness and charm, buckled chakar VYing lines across her brow, unease flickering in her gaze, a crack she couldn't hide in that moment. A 7-year-old had called her out cold. The silence stretched, heavy and frigid, a blizzard's hush blanketing the Rapid City Hall as Nora's question hung in the air, its simplicity slicing through the grit of Noem's rhetoric. It wasn't just a child's low sit, was a shard of reality piercing the heart of her platform, a plea wrapped in crayon that demanded more than swagger. The industrial lights hummed faintly, casting stark shadows across the folding chairs, as if the room itself froze under the weight of her words. Noem stood rooted, her knuckles whitening against the podium, her tailored shell fraying under a scrutiny she hadn't braced for in any State House speech or Fox News spot. Her eyes darted to the crowd searching for a foothold, stalling for a line, then snapped back to Nora, who stood firm, her journal clutched like a weapon, its purple scrawl a quiet indictment of a land left unprotected. The room's warmth dissolved, every shuffle of a coat, every clink of a mug, every stifled breath drowned by a hush that throbbed with her pain. This wasn't a reporter's trap or a rival's jab, it was a little girl's truth, its honesty a spotlight on a woman who'd built her name on strength, and it burned brighter than she could bear. Nora didn't waver. Her sneakers stayed planted, her gray eyes unblinking, daring Noem to answer not with boasts, but with something real. Her mother sank lower in her chair, her coat slipping as her program fell to the floor, her hands trembling as the weight of her daughter's boldness pressed down on her fragile frame. Whispers flared, "She's got her. What's she gonna say?" "That's a hard one." Their voices a low, urgent buzz that swelled and then hushed as the moderator waved them down, his clipboard shaking like a reed in a gale. Noem cleared her throat, a rough, grating sound that broke the silence, and smoothed her Chiquita reflex, a lifeline she grasped as the room waited. "That's a tough one, ain't it?" she said finally, her drawl quieter now, stripped of its ranch hand bark, the charm fraying into something unsteady. The crowd leaned forward, their bodies a sea of tilted heads and wide eyes, sensing a fracture in the woman who'd governed with iron resolve, a crack that widened with every second she couldn't fill. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving under her jacket, and met Nora's unflinching stare with eyes that flickered, just for a moment, with something unguarded sorrow, perhaps, or a truth she'd sidestepped. "I grew up on a ranch outside Hamlin," she began, her voice softening into something raw, almost hesitant, feeding calves, riding fence lines with my dad, learning this land's ours to keep. "We lost animal storms, wolves, but we fought to save them." Her words trailed off, and for a heartbeat, she wasn't the governor who'd stared down critics, just a woman peering into a past that didn't match the present she'd shaped. The crowd held its breath, the rancher in the back pausing mid-sip, the retiree's mug stilled in her hand. Every eye locked on Noem as she stood suspended in her own memory. Nora tilted her head, her pigtails swaying gently, her silence a quiet demand that pressed Noem deeper into the moment. "I've got a granddaughter a little older in you," Noem continued, her voice steadying but laced with a tremor she couldn't mask. "She loves the barn pigs, goats, the works. But a year back," she faltered, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard, her hands tightening on the podium until the metal creaked. "My niece's pony, Star, she was a sweet thing, got caught in a flash flood, run off from a bad season. We couldn't get to her in time, buried her by the creek. I told my sister it's nature's way, push for more grazing rights, thought that'd help us thrive. But hearing you, Nora," her voice broke, a sharp, brittle crack that echoed through the hall, and she looked down, blinking hard against the tears welling in her eyes, her steely mask slipping as she fought to steady herself. The crowd gasped, a jagged wave of shock and empathy that rolled through the chairs like a gust over the hills. A teacher in the front row pressed a hand to her chest, her sob muffled but piercing. A rancher muttered "Lord" under his breath, his hat dipping low. A young mom in the back clutched her coffee, her eyes glistening as she nodded slowly. Nora's mother looked up from her fallen program, her coat slipping to her elbows, a tear streaking down her cheek to drip onto the concrete, ing a dark spot that spread like ink. Noem's words weren't just an answer, they were a confession, a crack in the armor of a woman who'd built her name on toughness, and they landed with a force that shook the room to its core. Noem pressed on, her voice firming but hollowed out, as if the admission had drained something vital from her. "We're working-less rules, more land for ranchers, keeping food on tables. I fought for that, stood up to the feds. I ain't stopping." The words rang thin, a rancher's echo drowned by the vulnerability she'd let slip. Nora's brow furrowed, her hands tightening on her journal until the pages crinkled, her lips pressing into a line that said she wasn't here for excuses, she wanted truth, something to hold when Daisy's bell stayed silent. The crowd sensed it too, their murmurs shifting from awe to unease, a restless energy bubbling beneath the surface as they waited for more. The moderator edged closer, his clipboard clutched like a shield, his tick twitching as he prepared to move on. But Noem raised a hand, a sharp gesture that stopped him cold, her boots scuffing the concrete as she stepped from the podium, abandoning its safety entirely. She crouched before Nora, her jacket brushing the floor, her sharp edges blurring into something tender, almost frail. "What's your name, darling?" she asked, her voice a whisper now, barely audible over the wind but heavy with intent. "Nora," she said, steady, fierce, a quiet strength blooming beneath her breath. Noem nodded, a faint smile breaking through the cracks, her eyes shimmering with something raw. "You're something, Nora, stronger in me, stronger in most." Soft claps rippled through the crowd, fading as the air thickened, heavy with expectation. Nora shifted her weight, her sneakers scuffing the floor, and looked up at Noem with a clarity that cut through the haze. "Mama says helping means keeping things safe," she said, her voice a clear chime that sliced through the quiet like a bell over the prairie. "So why'd Daisy die if you're helping us?" Noem rocked back, her face crumpling a flash of a woman undone. Not a leader, her grit dissoul vying into something human and broken. The crowd caught its breath, a teacher's sob breaking free, a rancher's fist clenching as he nodded, the weight of Nora's words pressing down on every soul in the hall. Noem stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her hands flexing as she turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them with a heave-ness that hadn't been there before, a shadow of guilt and resolve mingling in her eyes. "She's calling it straight," she said, her voice louder now, cracked but rising, cutting through the murmurs like a plow through sod. "I've been pushing land, liberty, keeping us strong, but if kids like Nora are burying their goats, if Star's gone and I didn't see it, then I ain't helping enough. I ain't kept them safe." The room erupted gasps sharp as ice, sobs spilling from throats too tight to hold them, a swell of disbelief that crashed over the chairs like a flood over the flats. A farmer leapt to his feet, his hands clasped as dust fell from his boots. A retiree pounded her mug, her damn right, a growl that rumbled through the chaos. A young mom clutched her kid, her whispered truth lost in the din but etched in her glistening eyes. Nora's question had become a mirror, reflecting a loss too real to dismiss, a wound too deep to ignore, and Noem's admission had lit a fire that blazed through the hall. The Rapid City center quaked now, a wildfire roaring from Nora's spark, fanned by Noem's unraveling into a blaze that consumed every corner of the space. She stood exposed, her jacket creased, her hands flexing as if grasping for a stance she'd lost. Nora held her ground, her checkered shirt a flare of quiet courage against the dimness, her journal a banner of a grief that had flipped the night into chaos and reshaped it into something raw and urgent. The crowd was alive, tears streaked wind-worn faces, tracing paths through the grime of long days. Hands clasped in tight, desperate grips, knuckles widening. Eyes blazed with shock, anger, and a dawning resolve that flickered like embers catching wind. Her question, "Why'd Daisy die?" had torn the room apart, peeling back layers of bravado to reveal a bleeding heart beneath, and Noem's "I ain't helping enough" had struck the match, igniting a fire that refused to fade. Noem wiped her brow, her fingers brushing her hair as she stepped back to the podium, but its shield was ash now, a relic of a toughness she couldn't reclaim. "We're keeping South Dakota strong," she'd boasted in speeches and on the trail, her voice ringing across pastures and podiums, a line that once drew cheers and raised hats. Now it haunted her, etched into the lines of her face-tight lips pressed into a thin slash, shadowed eyes glistening with a guilt she couldn't bury, a doubt that clung like the prairie wind. The crowd felt it too, their murmurs swelling into a storm soft at first, a ripple of "she's right" and "what about us?" Then louder, a chorus of voices clashing in a symphony of frustration and awakening. A rancher stood, his hat clutched to his chest, his gravelly "my stock too" cutting through the noise. A teacher beside him rose, her sob breaking as she nodded, her floods every year a whisper that carried. A young dad in the back slammed his mug down, his muttered "this ain't strong" a plea that hung heavy. Nora's mother leapt up, pulling her close, her coat falling as she pressed her lips to Nora's pigtails, her wiry frame trembling with pride and heartbreak. "You're my fierce one, Nora," she choked out, her voice breaking as tears fell, dripping onto Nora's shirt to leave dark spots on the checks. Nora nodded, patting her mom's arm with a tenderness beyond her years, her gray eyes locked on Noem, glistening with a quiet steel that refused to bend. Noem crouched again, her boots brushing the concrete, and reached out with a shaking hand. Nora took idony fingers curling into her trembling palm, a bond forged in the wreckage of a night neither had expected. "You're a force, Nora," Noem said, her voice thick with awe, cracking under the weight. "Don't ever stop, Callan, okay?" Nora smiled, soft but real, a curve of her lips that lit her face like dawn over the hills. "Daisy wouldn't," she whispered, her words a dagger and a lifeline, and Noem froze, Star's echo ringing in her resolve. She stood slowly, her boots scuffing as she rose, and turned to the crowd, her voice rising, raw and unshackled, cutting through the chaos like a flare in the dusk. "This ain't just my wake-up," she said, fierce and trembling, her hands slashing the air as if to carve the words into the walls. "It's ours, all of ours. Kids like Nora bury their hearts while we talk strength and graze wide. While we miss the flood's takin, what's theirs? She's called me out, so why ain't we cowing this together? Why re we letting the land break him when we can mend it?" The room exploded. Applause thundered like a stampede. Shouts tore from throats raw with emotion. Chairs clattered as people leapt up in a swell that shook the floor. A teacher stood, sobbing, clapping until her hands bruised. A rancher pounded his fist, his dam straight, a growl that rumbled through. A young mom lifted her kid, her yes, a chant that wove into the roar. Strangers embraced ranchers with retirees. Moms with farmers' voices clashing in a cacophony of "we gotta fix it. This is on us, no more graves," and Nora stood with her mom. A fragile spark, now a blazing torch lighting the night. Noem raised both hands, stilling the storm with a gesture that trembled but held. Her face a battlefield of ruin and fire, cheeks streaked with sweat, eyes alight with a purpose that burned through the haze. "Tomorrow, I'm back in Pierre," she said, steady but shaking with resolve. "Not just to sign papers, I'm sitting with kids like Nora, families like yours, ranchers, workers, all of you, and we're making this right together. Strength ain't just holding ground, it's keeping it safe, and I'll be damned if I don't start now." The crowd roared, a tidal wave lifting the roof, claps sharp as thunder, cheers ragged with hope, tears streaming down, faces lifted in defiance, and unity in Nora's mother hoisted her onto her shoulders, her checkered shirt soaring as she waved her journal like a flare against the dusk. People stood linked by a shared wound, a fragile hope blazing into something fierce, their applause a vow to rise, to heal, to protect. As Noem stepped back, her shoulders slumped but her eyes burning, the room pulsed with a truth that wouldn't fade. A 7-year-old had called out a titan, not with rage, but with a question too true to duck. "Thank you, Nora," she said, lost in the din, "for setting us straight." Nora nodded, pigtails bouncing, and whispered to her mom, "Daisy be proud, right?" Her mom hugged her tight, tears soaking her shirt, her voice a broken sob of love. "So proud, Nora, so proud," she'd bleat. The lights flickered, but the fire didn't. People lingered, plotting, changed. A community forged in a little girl's call, her voice echoing beyond the walls to a nation watching. If a 7-year-old could demand better, so could we.